it's a good reminder, too, that no matter how nutsy a story sounds, like, making fun of the people that believed it is just never a great idea. And it's always a chance for us to look at context and move forward with empathy. Hey everybody, we are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
And I'm Dr. Erin.
And today we are going to be talking about a interesting, in the most general sense of the word, depressing potentially, harmful to some, batshit to others, documentary on HBO Max called The Way Down. And we're going to be doing lots of coverage around this here on the Abbey Research channel, not only of the documentary itself, but of the topics it unearths, as it were, because they are very, very near and dear to our heart, of the intersections of emotional abuse, religiosity, toxic diet culture, and personal childhood traumas of one of the two of us.
Institutional abuse.
Institutional abuse. Yeah, it's just kind of fun. So essentially the Way Down documentary tells the story of Gwen Shamblin, the late Gwen Shamblin. So we'll just spoiler alert that for you right up front. Gwen Shamblin died in May of 2021 in a plane crash. And it was one of those things that, for me, who kind of grew up in this evangelical world that she made a lot of money off of, I hadn't thought about her in years. And then as soon as she died, all of a sudden, like, there was all this coverage of it, and all of a sudden it came out that she was running a cult, and, like, all these other things, and I was like, oh. And
I'm sorry, did you say cult?
Did you say cult? Excuse me. And then I noticed that the Gwen that I remember from the videos when I was 11, and the Gwen that died, their hair was about a 2-foot difference. So there was a lot happening. And when I first heard of this documentary, I said to Dr. Erin, like, hey, we might want to talk about this. And then I watched it without Dr. Erin, which, in case it's unclear, we are actually two different people. And sometimes we do things separately. But we are normally very careful where if we know that something is going to be hard viewing for one or the other of us, we are aware enough to do it either in physical presence with each other, or we're on the Zoom at the same time, or something like that. And I didn't for this one, because I didn't think it was going to be a thing with a capital T. And what I want you guys to know is that it was. It really was a thing. And we'll get a little bit more into why it was a thing for me. But it is one of the reasons that this has spawned so much coverage on our end, is because it was so much deeper than either one of us anticipated an HBO Max documentary about a crazy cult lady to be. So we're going to spend this time talking about a hottish take entirely around what they cover in the first episode, which is the Way Down workshop. And we'll do an episode by episode coverage later on in 2022. And we'll talk about this again, but we wanted to spend a little bit more time unpacking here the intersections of religion, gender, and health and diet culture and some other things that the Way Down workshop all encompasses and makes it really easy to talk about. Before I get on my personal journey and soapbox with this, Dr. Erin, would you like to say anything so they hear a different voice besides mine?
Yeah. So, this is not my trauma. I had zero knowledge of the Way Down workshop and Gwen Shamblin prior to this documentary. We should say it's been executive produced by Chrissy Teigen, so that gives you, and is directed, by a woman named Marina Zenovich. And I think for me, what was so hideous about this particular story And I will give our friends at the Sinisterhood podcast credit for helping to articulate this in the way that I'm going to articulate it a bit better. They did a 2-part coverage of the story of Gwen Shamblin. And their second part came out right as the news that the HBO series was going to drop. But the way that they bastardized God's message, or what God could be for people, into a way that shamed them about their weight or their health. I think, I have critiques about organized religion. We all do. I have critiques about diet culture. We talk about it a lot. But like combining those to where you were telling people that God couldn't love you if you gained weight. And everything that Gwen developed in The Way Down was about being thin eating. And, I think she came by her baggage honestly. And Dr. Kristen can get more into the particular church environment she was born into. And, then she becomes a cult leader. Like, that part of the story is not the crazy part of the story. She is just a person type who believes that they should be the only voice in people's lives. And this episode gets into like the crazy story of how she developed this cult through her church and how she split with all the other churches because she denied the divinity of Christ, and boy, is that nutso. So there's a part of me that's just like fascinated by the human craziness that is Gwen Shamblin and Remnant Fellowship Church. But it's one of the most destructive models of diet culture I've ever encountered. And, I am not a person of Christian faith, but obviously I know and love lots of people who are. And to take a message that is about love and acceptance and to make it about guilt and shame is disgusting. And to say that that's what God wants you to do is disgusting. So I don't have a lot of time for those folks. Obviously, they've caused waves and waves and waves, undulating waves of harm, as we would say in the good doctor's parlance. Not just through the Way Down workshop, but through people who've survived and left the Remnant Fellowship cult. And we should say, like, we don't use the word cult lightly here at Abbey Research. Neither do they at HBO. And they have a lot of experts who study this for a living come on and say, no. As soon as it becomes more about a person than a faith system, it's a cult. And it became very quickly about Gwen maintaining control and power, and like so eerily similar to the way that is really the only other cult that I know a decent amount about is Scientology, the Church of Scientology. But very, very similar in terms of the approach of controlling the people, setting up entire ecosystems so that you didn't go to a car repair shop that wasn't run by a person in the church. You didn't get your hair done by somebody who wasn't in the church. Like all of these things, so that you don't interact with differing opinions and voices. So I think I've run the limit of my thoughts. I mean, there's so much to talk about this. And the other thing that was really disturbing about this was the tying of obedience to the diet culture and to the religious practice. And I mean, it was a mechanism of control, sociologically speaking, from a cult perspective. Like, you make it about obedience, you make it about control, and you can justify a lot of things. And, you know, in the other episodes, it gets into the damaging aspects of that obedience in terms of actual factual child abuse, dubious consent in marital relationships, telling people to go off their prescribed mental health medications, all of these kinds of things that domino effect from that obedience. But that was it. That was the core of it, was that if you didn't lose the weight, it was because you weren't being obedient to God. And you weren't true believers, and you weren't true followers. And that's where she started and took it into other worlds of horribleness.
To describe a little bit of the evangelical culture that was happening in the 1990s when this kind of all came about. And actually, one of my critiques of the documentary is that they are more interested in the Tiger King-y kind of dramatic elements.
They don't unpack the broader culture of it.
They don't bring in any sociologists of religion. They don't bring in any of us who are experts in evangelical subculture to talk about it, which is fine. I mean, I would just always ask Sarah Putnam-Bailey from NPR to be commenting on this kind of thing, but they didn't want to, and that's totally fine. There's a lot of us that are very, very academically minded that want to talk about these things. And I'm sad that they didn't take that opportunity. So allow me to in our space. So there was a huge movement in evangelicalism in the 90s and in the up to probably 2010. So when I'm going to say that we're talking about 1990 to 2010 in the next couple minutes to really remove ourselves from the world. One of the churches I went to in college had a bookshop, a coffee shop, a school, and the whole idea was that because the world hated us so much, wouldn't it be better if we only spent time together? And it's not a whole lot of steps from that to you can't spend time with other people. But there were, camps that I went to where you brought all your secular music CDs and threw them in a bonfire. And the idea was to only listen to Christian music. There was lots of pearl clutching over the fact that Christian movies were so terrible, because what were we supposed to do? I guess we'll still have to watch regular movies until Christian movies become better. And I remember being taught exactly how to make the argument that Christian music was just as good as regular music and everybody should be listening to it. It still is a distinct subculture, for sure. It is smaller than it was when I was a part of it, statistically. And it is also a little bit more insular than it was when I was a part of it, and significantly more political than it was when I was a part of it. But that time span and the politics really started in the 2004 election, just as a heads up. But kind of that span, I was really active in it from 1993 to around 2006. So that 13-year span, it really crumbled for me when I went to Northern Ireland and I saw a different way to love Jesus. It really, really crumbled for me and I became a different kind of Christian. But I was super evangelical through high school and most of college. And so all of that to say, there's so much of this that it was hard for me to be like, oh, that's really damaging. Because I just wanted, my immediate defensive mechanism was oh, but that's normal. That's okay. That's biblical. That's fine. And so I'm still processing through exactly what is toxic and what is toxic from her and what is toxic from the rest of things. Because here's the thing that no one is saying out loud. She wasn't the only evangelical talking about diet culture as obedience. She's the most overt. But every sermon that everyone ever stood up and said that your body is a temple, trust me, when they look, everyone in the church looks at every fat person in the room. When they stand up and talk about being obedient before God, even if you aren't in the Way Down workshop, because trust, my church only did it for a year and a half, and this lingered. Everything in the room would be on me. When I would go up for prayer to ask about, I really want to serve the Lord, and I really, literally, people would say, well, it's time to get healthy. And they would ask me about my workout regimens and my diets and things like that, because the message was that God couldn't use me if I was fat. That was the message. That I wasn't being faithful. I had to have a better prayer life. I had to have a better this. I had to have a better that. And just like every other subculture, there are standards that we expect everybody to live up to. And in evangelical youth subculture, girls were to be quiet, blonde, no bigger than a size 10, and absolutely want to have children as soon as humanly possible. So you can imagine Kristen growing up and never, ever fitting that ever. Now, no one ever told me to dye my hair blonde, but they told me every other one of those things to change. I got constantly talked about wanting to have kids. I got constantly talked about getting in shape. I got, and it was things like, well, what if God calls you to a remote tribe in the middle of Australia? You really need to be able to live in tents for like months at a time. And it wasn't until I got to college where I was like, why the fuck would God call me somewhere that my body can't live? That's insane. Like, but you're in it so much and it's constantly confirming. I was not in a cult. I am very uncomfortable calling evangelicalism as its entirety a cult, because you can get out of it. Yeah. Your family may choose not to speak to you, but the whole movement will not disown you. There are movements within it that are cults. There are congregations within it that are cults. I understand the pain that a lot of people have been through, and they want to call it entirely a cult. Not only as a sociologist of religion, but as a human, I can't do that. Especially the Pentecostal movements that I was caught up in. They look culty, but they're not, because again, you can leave. And that's a huge, one of the big factors. Can you leave or not? All that being said, my church did Way Down Workshop when I was 10, 11, and 12. And I was hired to be the babysitter it ran on Tuesday nights. Because contrary to popular belief, I'm actually really good with kids. But I was hired, and I was in children's theater. I am very good with kids. I was hired to be the babysitter for the moms that would go in and do the workshop on Tuesday nights. And as payment, I was given the materials. I think Mom and I both believe they paid me cash, but I was definitely also paid in the materials. And while I was sitting in the, nursery watching Veggie Tales and Salty the Singing Songbook, shout out to all of my post-EV friends for that. And the Donut Man, I haven't thought about him in a while. Anyway, while I was watching all of that, these women were watching videos that Gwen Shamblin was doing, and then I was allowed to borrow it for the week. And I would go home and I would watch the video and I would do my workbook. And the entire philosophy of thin eating is just to decide to stop eating. Every single thing you put in your mouth, you asked yourself if you were eating because you were bored or you were eating because you were hungry. Again, this was probably the 4th diet I was on. I'd already been on Jenny Craig at this point when I was 11. And I want to say again, as I say in every single one of these videos where we talk about my body, my parents were doing this because they loved me and they thought this was loving. And this is what their community told them was loving. This is what our doctors told them was loving. When I went on Jenny Craig when I was 10, it's because my doctor told my parents to put me on Jenny Craig. So this is insidious and big and wide and a lot. And what I took from the Way Down Workshop was that I could not be used by God if I was fat. And I realized in watching this documentary that I still believe that the reason a lot of my dreams haven't come true is that of my size. And I felt this overwhelming need to apologize to Dr. Aaron for holding us back as a company because I was still so fat. And I realized that that was all from Gwen Shamblin. It was all these things I didn't even know I believed anymore. But it was so deep and so insidious. And then I went on and it was compounded on top of it. I went to colleges. In college, I remember I really, really liked this boy. And he told me he could never bring me home to his mother because I didn't look like what a pastor's wife would look like. And what he really meant was that I was fat. And there was so much crap on my campus, so much garbage about bodies and everything else. No point in my faith journey have I been personally in a community that talks about bodies in a healthy way. They either don't talk about them at all, or they talk about them the way that Gwen did, and the way that my church did, and the way that my college did. We know that Christian young women are one of the highest proportions of eating disorders in the United States. It's about, they figure somewhere around 45% of Protestant Christian young women before they hit 25 will struggle with disordered eating. I wasn't diagnosed, but my God, when I look back, I definitely had disordered eating, like definitely. So you think about people like me who didn't even go to a doctor. They were just told to go to Jenny Craig, what the statistics must be ahead of time. All of that to say, this is a very specific intersection for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world that we are not talking about. Evangelical Christianity is not the only religion that pretends that its deity wants you to look a certain way. There are some sects of some faiths where it's actually very important that you look a certain way. There's lots of things with body and worship. The problem is when we look at the damage that can do to humans, we also have to remember to hold their humanity and someone else's deity in tension. And that is kind of where I'm at this point. This is something I'm still really, really processing, as I think you can kind of, as you can kind of tell. I think this might be the longest soapbox I've gone on. I think I've been talking for 15 straight minutes. But this is diet culture. This is, and when we say diet culture, just like we say America's a rape culture because it's permissible, we permit women to be sexually assaulted without a whole lot of uproar. America's a diet culture because we permit disordered eating without a whole lot of uproar. And so it's the same thing. B, if you watch this and were triggered too, slide on into my DMs. I'm looking for more friends to talk to. Can we all be trauma buddies together? But also, in all seriousness, you're not alone. This is stuff that's deep, deep-seated. And we're all hitting it at different times and in different ways. And we're all learning to talk about bodies differently now here in the year of our Lord 2021 than we did in 1991, 1996. I think it was I think it was 96 when we did it. I could be wrong. My church dumped her when she decided to not believe in the deity of Jesus. But kind
of a big deal.
My Methodist church was like, oh, we really, 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 really believe in the Trinity, so we're going to deuce out. So I say all of that to hopefully give you a different side. I get told all the time that I'm really strong. And I get told all the time that people are, they just want to have, I literally, direct quote, I want to be you when I grow up. All of these kind of things. And I don't understand why. But I also, therefore, now feel a deep responsibility to explain all of the baggage that comes with being me as well. In the hopes that everyone can understand that no matter how strong someone looks, this is usually the soup that's swimming in their soul. And so be gentle and curious and loving and kind to the people that look like they have it all together just as much as the folks that don't. Soapbox completed.
I mean, and I think the point about the impact of not just the way down, but of evangelical Christianity on young folks, on whose brains aren't fully cooked, is a really important thing. I mean, you talked about your own experience and what age you were, and they get into this a bit in episode 3 of this docuseries. And we should say there's going to be more episodes of this in 2022. We will be covering episode by episode as well in 2022, early 2022. And then, obviously we'll come back to it once we get more episodes because we, to our understanding, the spoiler alert, death of Gwen Shamblin and Joe Lara in the plane crash in 2021 is maybe creaking open some closet doors here where they've been hiding some skeletons. So we will see what HBO does with this. But I think that's a huge part of this, and they skim the surface of it in episode 3 when they talk about the way children were treated, like specifically children that weren't obedient, but also they talked to a lot of young folks who were just swimming in that soup, as Dr. Kristen called it, and how much of them were in pain, how much of them were unhappy, how much of them caused harm to themselves, including deaths by suicide, for the pressure they were under to meet this unattainable standard of this perfect, thin, obedient human. And I think that's a really important part to make sure that we emphasize. Like this was a program that was really harmful for a lot of folks because it was originally aimed at adults. But, to aim it then at children whose brains aren't fully developed.
And I should say, I did the adult version. They did actually... I was always so advanced for my age. But they did develop actually a children's only curriculum called Exodus, which also made me go, really? Because that's the name of the terrible anti-gay conversion therapy that got shut down a couple years ago. I was like, really, guys? And literally part of the Israelite story is the story of fasting and not having enough food. So really, it's really bad. But the one that I did was the adult version, and I've talked to other people my age that also did the adult version as teenagers. So it's a both and. But they designed one for children as young as 6 that they ran in their church in the Remnant Fellowship.
Yeah, which was definitely something that came about more in the 2000s after the creation of the Remnant Fellowship. But I think one of the things that was so fascinating that the docuseries brought out was that they developed a specific weight loss program for children, but they didn't have a specific theological program for children. So they didn't have like youth church services or a creche or something. Like the children had to sit through 3-hour Saturday sermons. So that tells you, I think, what was really emphasized as the most important aspect of this belonging to this system. But I think it's, it's important to remember, as Dr. Kristen said as well, that especially when trauma happens when we're so young, we aren't as aware of it. I mean, they talk to a lot of adults who were in the church, who left the church, who are able to talk about the trauma that they went through. But for a lot of folks who went through this, they might, like Dr. Kristen is the perfect example, but that she wasn't aware of the level of damage and trauma and pain that still existed in her. And so I really want to finish out by emphasizing that there's a lot of folks we don't know that don't know they're in pain over this and don't know they've been traumatized by this. So make sure to extend that grace even beyond the scope of people who have spoken out about the harm caused by this program, because there's a lot of folks out there.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder, too, that no matter how nutsy a story sounds, like, making fun of the people that believed it is just never a great idea. Like, Gwen Shamblin was, potentially a sociopath, and definitely a cult leader. But, and there's some questions around her daughter who has taken over the church now and kind of what Amanda is doing and thinking and all those kind of things. But we all believe different things for different reasons. We all come across different things at different reasons. I didn't recruit anyone to a cult, but I definitely emotionally manipulated my friends into praying prayers that they probably didn't want to pray. So, because I thought that's what made me a good person, that's what would get me to heaven, and that's kind of all those things. So, as we're talking about all of these we're going to keep talking about institutional abuse, and we'll talk about more about cults on this channel than we have before, much to my glee. But we have to, because there's so many of them. My God, they're just proliferating all over the place. It's like the 70s all over again. That judging people for what they believe is never productive. And it's always a chance for us to look at context and move forward with empathy.
Yeah, so that is a wrap on our hot-ish take for the HBO series, The Way Down. As we said, stay tuned for our continuing discussion of all of the intersections that we've found in this docuseries: diet culture, toxic wellness, the intersection of evangelical Christianity, cults, institutional abuse, nothing but sunshine and rainbows, as we say here at Abbey Research, but we'll be continuing this conversation in a lot of different venues. And we will certainly be doing the episode by episode discussions, because there's so much we didn't even talk about still about The Way Down in the new year. So if you are watching this on the YouTubes, hello. Please do the YouTube-y things. Comment, like, subscribe so that you don't miss out on all our fun conversations. If you're listening to this on the podcast eventually, hello, podcasters, please do the podcasty things. Review if you really like this episode and it speaks to you. Rate and review. We'd love that. Follow, share, tell your friends. If you are out there in the world listening to this and you enjoy having these conversations intellectually with Dr. Kristen and I, please tell other people about it. Would you like to end with a benediction, Dr. K, or do you want me to close it out?
Oh, I will. So as a reminder, as we say in a lot of the trauma stuff, if you've been affected by this and you'd like to talk about it, our YouTube channel is at your disposal, potentially. So shoot a message on a DM and we can talk about that. In the meantime, what we hope is that you realize that you are enough. You are wanted and worthy and important and loved, and you are enough. No matter what the messages around you tell you, there is nothing about you that has to change in order for you to be worthy, wanted, and loved. Take a deep breath, take care of yourself, take care of others, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.